microphone on for the people online. There we go. Welcome to the first general session of the Southern Medical Association. I now call this meeting to order. It's not very loud. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. As I said, I'm Dr. Philip Hartman, President-elect of the Southern Medical Association. I'm standing in for Dr. David Avery today because he had to travel to Florida to help with his ill brother. I'd like everyone to pause for a moment of silence and say a prayer for Dr. Avery's family. Thank you. Now, Dr. Avery did send along his presidential address, so I will share it with you now. He wrote, "It's been an honor to have served as your president this past year. I am so sorry I can't be here with you this week due to a family emergency. It's been an interesting year, but I think we've made real progress in revitalizing our organization. Starting 3 years ago, Dr. Kumar began this process with restructuring our governance. He went to a committee structure, away from the 2 counselors per state. Dr. DePettit restructured our bylaws and established core foundational principles for us to build upon. My year, the membership voted to restructure the Alliance to make it an equal committee with a vote on the board. This has never occurred before. We feel the Alliance is an equal committee with the other 3 committees and should be represented as such. We spent a year doing it, and I'm sorry some people got upset with us. This year, we need to restructure SMA services. We have our finances in better shape, so we can be financially sound for the foreseeable future. We were in bad shape, but I now feel we are sound. I wish to thank Randy Glick and the full staff, as without them, this job would be impossible. I hope to see everyone next time, and I really miss not being here." All right. The floor is now open to SMA members. Please raise your hand and wait for a microphone before speaking. Before speaking, please also state your name for the record. The floor is open if anyone has any questions, comments, or other items they'd like to share. There being no comments, we will move on to our keynote address. I am honored to introduce to you Dr. Stan Harris. Dr. Harris is Associate Dean for Graduate and International Programs and Luck Professor in the Harbert College of Business at Auburn University. Dr. Harris provides leadership for Harvard's full-time online Executive MBA and Physicians Executive MBA programs. Thank you for speaking with us today, Dr. Harris.
I'm a loud talker, so and I think I'm being recorded, so I have a little line here to stand behind, which is I may blow up before this is over with because I'm usually I run around a lot. So what I'd like to do is I really want to give you a framework to think about change. How many of you guys are dealing with change in your organizations? Okay, yeah, no, that's at least we're on the right topic here. In addition, I've been asked to sort of reflect a little bit on what change means in terms of millennials and some of our ways of thinking about the different demographics that we may be interacting with and dealing with. So I'm just going to jump into this thing, but we're a small group, so holler out if you got a question or anything else. I'm going to just walk you through hopefully in a way to give you some ideas about how to better manage change in others and in yourself. So this little slide kind of captures something that's about change. It's been true for years and years and years. When you think about change efforts, regardless of what you're trying to do, put in a new, EHR, do whatever, okay? In your organizations, reorganizing, restructuring things, trying to, make ERs run more efficiently, whatever it is, okay? These kind of planned changes where we spend time trying to figure out what it is we should do, how we should do it, and try to implement it, really only about a third of those work, okay? Only about a third of them. We just got through with the World Series. If you can think about it, when you get up to bat, you're trying to do something, you're trying to accomplish something, getting a hit or whatever. But if I'm trying to hit a home run in my change efforts, about a third of the time, I hit a triple or a home run, okay? The other problem is, though, in about a third of the time, I may get on first base. So a lot of our change efforts, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to do them and what to do and how to do it effectively. But the problem is, a third of them just don't hit the mark. They underperform for some reason. We get part of what we hope to accomplish, but we don't accomplish everything. And then about a third completely miss the mark. They mess things up, or they may even make things worse. So again, about 1 in 3. Well, how can you more effectively motivate others and yourself? Because a big part of motivating others is how you feel about change yourself and your own reactions to change. So how do you get a grasp about yourself? And by the way, we can talk about change in organizations, but we can talk about personal change. We can talk about, hey, I need to go exercise more, or I need to work on my marriage, or I need to do whatever. Many of you work with your patients and you're trying to encourage them to change. So it's about maybe motivating them to do something different. So we're dealing with change all over the place, okay? In organizations writ large, in our own personal lives, and with those that we're interacting with. So this talk that we're going to talk, this time we're going to be spending together is really about this motivating yourself and others to support these change efforts. So learning objectives, I want to share with you 5 sort of key concerns that underline decisions to resist, comply with, or embrace a change. And you'll find that maybe some of our different generations react to these. They're still the same questions, but what may be important to them is a little different. We're going to talk about how you might think about change efforts to understand their implications for the challenge you're likely to face. And then we're going to talk about 6 strategic change activities that underlie attempts to shape and motivate change. So why does change often fail? In my mind, a lot of it has to do with, there's 2 pillars that sort of keep good change going, right? They support effective change. One is, what's being changed? What is it you want to change? Okay, we're going to do this new EMR. Okay, we're going to implement this EMR. This particular one, we had multiple options and things on the table. This is what we're going to do. That's the change target. That's what you focus on. Okay? And we spend a lot of time with consultants and in meetings and everything else thinking about what it is we're going to change. Okay? What's the right answer? And that's important. But what we oftentimes fail to do is we don't spend much time thinking about how we're going to implement that, how we're going to get people to buy in, how we're going to encourage folks to be part of this. And you'll find that, again, different generations have different rationales and may approach a change in a little bit different way. But so we're going to, the one thing on the left is really important. It's really stupid to make a bad decision about what change you're going to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can improve the likelihood that you do. But again, we throw so many resources as to what the change ought to be and what's the right answer. It's really the right side, this process that we need to focus a little bit on. So I'm going to talk about process a good bit. The psychology of change, all right? This little diagram to me captures something about what it feels like to change. And you can begin to think about what's going on in this person's mind as they're making this leap of change, right? They're moving from one side to the other of whatever, okay? So what do you think might be going on in this person's mind? Fear. Fear of what, Randy? Fear of, I don't know what's going to be over there, okay? So I can be the leader and say, it's wonderful over there, trust me. But you know what, you've never been over there. I can tell you, hey, you need to move to this new neighborhood. It's the best in town. Well, you've never lived there. You can learn something about it, but there's still that uncertainty. Change is always about some uncertainty, and that's a big, huge factor that underlies the psychology and how people react to change, because all the research suggests that uncertainty is extremely stressful. Okay? Stress is a result of uncertainty, that fear that comes from that. So that's one thing that might be thinking about, right? What else will you might be thinking about? Desire. So tell me a little bit more about that, Phil.
So he's got to want something on the other side to want to go through that.
Okay, he's got to want something. There's got to be some sort of desire. Now, the desire may be something on the other side. It could also be something I'm getting away from, right? There could be a big bear over there, or some of you have heard the burning platform, the notion that if you want to get people off of where they are now, set it on fire. If you're from California or know people there, I apologize for that. That's not a good joke right now, but it's like there's got to be a motive. There's like, why am I doing this? What am I trying to get something? Am I trying to escape something? What's going on? Okay. Another thing you might be thinking about is, what happens if I don't make it? Can I make it? There's the whole issue of personal efficacy. If I try to make this jump, am I going to succeed? Right? Can I really do this thing? And, that fear, that concern is also magnified by this chasm. Is this the endless chasm of doom? Or is it just there's a bunch of pillows down there? How soft is the landing? They may also be thinking about, hey, if I don't like it, can I go back? They may be thinking about, do I believe what the person told me? So there's all of these things going on in a person's mind. And I'll just say, how many of you have moved to a different home voluntarily? Okay, many of you, okay. Well, when you get there, when you're buying that home, do you remember that feeling? It's like, oh, I'm so excited, but what if the neighbors are nut jobs? What if they got a barking dog all the time? Or, did they really, and also you're leaving behind something. Memories that were made in a previous home. You may be leaving behind things you are happy to leave, the plumbing that always rattles. But you may also be leaving behind the tick marks on the door as your kids grew up, or the neighbor that you have a drink with every Friday night, or whatever. You may be moving out of that kind of thing. So every change, regardless if you want it or not, requires loss. You have to give up some things. Some of those things you're happy to get rid of, and some of them you may be a little bit reluctant to get rid of, right? Most people get married because they want to, but that's one reason we have bachelor and bachelorette parties, so we can celebrate the stuff we got to get rid of, right? So, but there's also this other thing about what you look forward to, what it's going to be like, and the potential. Again, it's the potential, because you don't know. If you've never been married to this person, you've never been married to that person. If you've never lived in this new house, you've never lived in that new house. If you've never tried this EMR that people say is wonderful, you've never been there. Okay, you've never done it before. Now, you can have great promises, but this kind of tension is always underlying change efforts. So it's important to begin to think about that, where people are coming from, and you and yourself. A lot of times you're not in the position to decide what the change is. You're in the position to try to help implement it or to accept it yourself. So you can begin to even think about it from that point of view. So as we're beginning to do this, I just want to real quickly share with you some ways to think about change. So there's multiple kinds of change, and I'm going to talk about two dimensions. The first one is this reactive, where you got to stop the bleeding, okay? In a reactive change, there is a clear problem. It's undisputable. People can see it, all right? We're losing money, where patients are leaving, employees are quitting, our Press-Ganey scores have bottomed out. They're off the chart on the bottom, okay? There's a problem. There's a major problem, and you have to change to fix it, okay? Another kind of change is more proactive. You know, things aren't too bad. Things are going pretty well. But there's an opportunity, or I see an opportunity, or maybe we have a chance to make things even better. We have an opportunity to do something. So you're anticipating the future. It's like, if we do this, we can be better prepared, or we can be even better than we are now, right? So there's not a clear problem. Now, which one of those do you think is likely to be the easiest to get people to buy into? A reactive, right? Yeah, hey, I go to my doctor, it's like, you need to lose weight. It's like, okay, yeah, I know, I mean, it's Halloween, I shouldn't be talking about this, and you guys will probably look, if there's dessert tonight, you'll count it, but you know, it's like, I need to lose weight, so that's great. Now, I'm probably likely to be a little more motivated if I have a heart attack, and he tells me, you know, you need to lose some weight, all right, because then there's a big problem there. So, but proactive change is really important, okay? The great organizations and the great people in their lives do things proactive. They don't always wait till they're hurting to take care of things. Another way to think about change is what kind of change. Is it going to be an incremental change where you're just going to improve on things? You're going to do a fine-tuning of things? You know, we got an EMR right now, but we're going to change a little bit, or we're going to get a little bit different vendor. It's going to improve some things, but it's essentially the same experience kind of thing. All right? Versus, you know what? We're going to completely change the way we do things. All right? We're going to fundamentally do things differently. You've seen a lot of these fundamental changes in healthcare. Right? You've seen a lot of these, electronic medical records being one of them, the physician practices becoming less private and more involved with the hospital kind of setting. You've seen reimbursement approaches change in very fundamental ways. A lot of fundamental change is happening in the business of healthcare. You change the culture, you transform what's important and how do we do things, right? The notion 20, 30 years ago that a particular kind of nurse could prescribe you drugs was unheard of, right? That's a fundamental way we think about the relative authority or power structure in healthcare. That's just one of multiple examples. Well, as you might guess, it's a little bit more difficult to convince people to get on board with a fundamental change, because it's hard. You got to change your paradigms, you got to change your schemas, you got to change your thinking about what's the right way to do things. Okay, it's an effort. It's a cognitive effort that takes time, that takes energy, and it becomes a little bit more stressful, or a lot more stressful. What I would encourage you to do is, when you think about a change that you're facing, is try to find out where it stands. Now, it may be somewhere in the middle. It may not be entirely clear. But, you know, if you're in a budget model, if you're in a new reimbursement model that requires electronic medical records as part of your reimbursement calculation, okay, and if you don't do it, you're not going to get that money. That's going to be a reactive change, right? If we don't do this, we're going to lose a lot of money. And if you've kept everything on paper forever, and you got 2 storerooms full of paper, and you don't know how to use a computer, that's going to be a fundamental change. All right? So you're going to be over here. It's a reactive, but it's a fundamental change. You may not be in the situation. Maybe it's more proactive and fundamental. Or, hey, we got this major problem right now that's real clear, but we don't have to do a whole lot of stuff to deal with it. You can begin to think about where your change is, because these changes where the change is directly relates to the kind of stress that people are going to feel and the likelihood that you're going to face some resistance. Particularly, it's easiest when it's clear we got to change and we don't have to do a whole lot to do. We got just some incremental stuff to do. The hardest thing to do is a proactive fundamental change. It's not entirely clear we need to change, and by the way, we're going to do a big, deep, fundamental change. These others are somewhere in between. But just because this is hard, I should say, doesn't mean you should ignore it. If you think about the great leaders that you're aware of in the world or in history or whatever else, a lot of where they made their mark was taking on challenges that weren't entirely clear that they needed to be done. Maybe oftentimes we'll talk about they were ahead of their time and they pushed through things before it was obvious that we needed to do some of this. So don't shy away from this stuff. Just remember that it might be a lot more challenging than some of these other kinds of changes. So you're going to get to take a test, right? So here's what type of change is likely to generate the most resistance? What is the correct answer? Yes, you are correct. Yay. See, I told you there'd be a test here if you didn't believe me. So that's a little bit of framework. What are the possible ways that a person can respond to a request for change? I just heard you guys were talking about how the organization here has made some changes in the last few years. If Philip got up and said, hey, guess what? This is what we're going to do now. This is the big change. By the way, I don't know. I'm just making that up on the fly, so don't worry, okay? This is the big change we're going to implement. And you're sitting there thinking, well, all right, what are the possible reactions to that, hey, we're going to change, could you have?
Say yes and do it.
Okay.
Say yes and don't do it. Say no and do it. Say no and don't do it. Not respond.
Okay, I like that. So yes and do it. Say yes and don't do it. Say no and do it. And say no and don't do it. And then don't say anything at all. I like those. I got 3, but I can put them in those. So I'm gonna make this work. You're exactly right. 1 is resistance. Okay? Resistance. No. That's the no. Okay? Now, the no, most of the time, the no, unless you've got a lot of power, and you will find people in your health systems that have a lot of power, and no is a big deal. I mean, they oftentimes, but most of the time, the no is more of no or yeah, it's this covert kind of thing. It's not explicit. It's kind of this implicit behind the scenes. So they drag their feet. They bad talk the change. They try to drum up support. They try to drum up support for their resistance. They try to, always throw barriers up to making the change happen. Okay, there's a lot of ways you can resist. Now, the good thing about resistance is that you can have a lot of good ideas. If you come up with a change and people resist, you ought to listen to what they got to say, because you might be about to do something stupid. So resistance, how many of you in here have ever resisted a change? How many of you thought you were doing it just to be a pain in the you-know-what? Oh, one of you, okay. I'm glad you're honest. Yeah. Sometimes that's a little fun. But everybody that resists change feels like they got a doggone good reason to resist change, right? And so if you're trying to do a change, you ought to listen to that. You ought to hear it, because maybe you're going to find out some things that would be beneficial to improve the change that you've got in mind, or maybe even change your mind about what you need to do. So, but the other thing I want to say is that people don't always resist change. Every time, I do change all the time. People's like, oh, people always resist change. That is not true. Peter Sunjay said it well. People don't resist changing, they resist being changed. That's a fundamental difference. All right? How many of you in here have voluntarily gotten married? at some point in your life, okay? Voluntarily chose to have a child, okay? Voluntarily chose to take a different job, right? Those are pretty damn big decisions, right? Those are big changes. And you voluntarily did it, and most of the time you were enthusiastic about it. People don't resist change. People embrace big, life-changing things all the time. It doesn't mean it's not stressful. It doesn't mean there's not uncertainty. It doesn't mean all that cycle that you have to give up some things to get something else. But we still do this, right? What we don't like is for somebody to tell us what to do and tell us to change and make us feel forced to change. We're going to find that a lot of ways that we deal with motivating change is to create a sense that you're not requiring it, but that that the person is making some of their own decisions about the change. They have some volition or agency in this change, okay? So keep that in the back of your head. So, but at some point, resistance, I'm going to listen to it, I'm going to think about it, I'm going to respect it, but at some point we got to move beyond resistance if we're going to change. The other one is this compliance, okay? You say yes, but you really mean no, or you say no, but you yes, and this, I'm all confused, but that's all right. This is this like stupid idea, but I guess I got no choice, right? I'm going to do it anyway. I got to do it, all right? Well, the problem with compliance is, now, sometimes that's all I need. If it's a great idea and I can get you to at least start and try it, maybe you'll find out you like it, right? But it's such lackluster energy. It's really just this feet-dragging kind of thing, and it takes a lot of effort on the part of people to kind of encourage that movement. And once you take your eye off, they just go back to the way they were before. So compliance is okay. But I don't want to build my whole effort around compliance. This is what I want: commitment or willingness. Count me in. Notice willingness. People don't resist change, they resist being changed. This sense that, yeah, you know what? Now, most of the time it's not like, oh, that's great, I can't wait. Sometimes you luck into that. But mostly it's like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. It's not a bad idea. Let's see what happens. Even that, whatever range that willingness and that commitment is on, it's still powerful because you've engaged the person at a deeper motivational level. So what we're going to talk about is how do we get to that commitment? Okay? How do we build that commitment to change? I will say, and by the way, I was asked to talk a little bit about millennials. How many of you in here are millennials? All right, so you speak up if I misstate, because I'm a dyed-in-the-wool baby boomer, right? So, and it's always, it's like, I'm sure I wouldn't like my parents to tell me what I was going to be like or what I'm like. So we'll just realize that we're going to try not to be overly stereotypical, or, in our generalizations will be broad, but there are some generational differences that we can kind of talk to. One of the first ones is that millennials are not as freaked out about this change as the baby boomers and the Gen Zs, okay? Generally, the research suggests that change is sort of part of the way of life and the way that millennials think about things. If you think about some of the changes that they've experienced in their lives, particularly in terms of communication, electronic, digital kind of communication, and all those things, they've seen the big recession, they've seen all of these things. So change, they're kind of used to that a little bit more. So it's not quite as scary for them. So probably some of us baby boomers can learn some from the millennials about that. But let's talk about the ways we might motivate somebody to change. Hey, you know what? I'm the boss, and I said do it. Well, when you tell somebody do it because I'm the boss and I said to, does that inspire a lot of enthusiasm? No, not a lot, okay? That's a great idea. No, that's not what you're going to get. You're going to get resistance or compliance. People don't resist change, they resist being changed. You're telling them to change, okay? And by the way, again, millennials are less tolerant of this kind of top-down, autocratic approach to management, leadership, change, etc., okay? It's just not, it just, for them, it just doesn't make sense. It's like, why are we doing it this way? So that's a problem. So you don't want, but again, traditionally, and this is somewhat stereotypic, but traditionally, medicine has been autocratic and authoritarian based. Many of your experiences in medical school was entirely this way, okay? And it gets perpetuated, and we begin to see that. And that's some of the problems with what faces medicine, is this sort of attitude about kind of command and control kinds of things. That doesn't mean that you need to take a vote when you're in a surgery center. I mean, in the surgery, that's not what we're talking about. But at some point, that sometimes trickles over into all the ways we think about it. It's hard to get people to buy in and get committed to change with that sort of approach. Oh, I can threaten you. Hey, do it or else. Well, that's even worse, right? Resistance or compliance is the response you're going to get from that. People hate being threatened, and if they can resist, they will. If they can't, they'll comply, but it'll be very reluctant. Well, I can give you rewards. Everybody in here loves rewards. I love rewards, and I want more of them. I like them, okay? We all like them. The problem with rewards is you have to be fair with them, and you have to, people have to feel like it's fair, and it's a very complicated thing. But at the same time, rewards don't buy commitment, okay? They don't. Now, if you don't give them some, that's what's viewed as fair, it undermines things. But you don't generally, with rewards, you get compliance. Because what happens when the reward disappears or goes away? Okay? Rewards are nice, but they don't buy commitment. So, the traditional ways I'm the authority, I told you, I've threatened you a little bit, and now I'm trying to reward you. I'm trying to be a sweet guy now, but I got rid of resistance, but I haven't got commitment up there yet. So how do we get commitment? Influence with reason and expertise. Why? Tell me why. This is why you should change. Notice, if I take the time to explain to you why I think you should change, implicit in that explanation is the possibility that you might disagree with me. So if you agree that people don't resist change, they resist being changed. I'm trying to convince you because implicitly I want you to decide to join me. Is that okay? Now, the problem with this is they might disagree with you, but at least you open the door for commitment. This is why we should change. Let me explain it to you. Let me give you some information. And obviously you need to know what you're talking about and have credibility. Influence with character and credibility. I need your help. Can you change for me? Everybody in here has done a favor that you really weren't excited about, but you willingly chose to do it for somebody that you respected and admired and appreciated. If you're a jerk and people don't like you, it's hard to convince them to get committed to help you do anything or anything that you're trying to lead. I admire and respect you. Am I going to commit? And then there's influencing with vision and inspiration. Change because it will help us achieve great things. Now, this is important to everyone. Everyone wants to be a part of something big and something noble. You guys are in healthcare. I know oftentimes it gets lost in billing and insurance and all that other stuff that you have to deal with. But you're in a noble profession. Okay? And a lot of the people you're trying to encourage to change, sometimes need a reminder of that. And your change efforts, to the extent possible, need to be embedded in this. Now, I know not all of them are easily fit into that thing. But if I say, again, I may not agree with your great thing, but the person is thinking about, am I going to commit? I will tell you that this is powerful for everybody, but a lot of the research suggests that millennials, again, are very socially conscious. So embedding this thing, important things in terms of the good for mankind and the good for the community and the good for health is very important, okay? It's very important for them. But again, it's important for all of us as well. So, what I'm basically saying is, if you're going to try to get commitment, you need to be willing to try to explain what's going on and why. You need to have some credibility. You need to be a person of character. And you need to have why is this important in the broader scheme of things that you can connect that to. So my colleagues and I at Auburn, we've been doing this research over 20 years. We've been working on these questions. What questions do you ask yourself to just help you decide whether or not you're going to resist, comply with, or willingly commit to a change? And so these 5 commitment questions are sort of what we've been focusing on. The first of those, discrepancy. Is there a need to change? Okay? Where are we now versus where we want to be? Again, in a reactive change, it's very clear. We're look at the numbers, or look at the patients, or look at the mortality, or whatever it is. We need to do something. This is unacceptable. Okay? The gap is very clear there. But if you're trying to do something more expansively and make a difference in a even deeper way, in a more fundamental way, you have to explain that. And this is really important for vision. Our research suggests everybody wants to know why we need to change. Why is very important. Millennials, why is very important. They want to have a sense of reason behind things. Wants it to make sense. And the why can't be because I said so. Okay? What are we trying to fix? What are we trying to be? Now, the gap can be where you want to be now. I don't want to be sick from a patient point of view. I don't want to be sick, so what do I need to do so I'm not sick? But there's also, I could have a healthy patient or a fairly well patient, and I can say, what can I do to flourish as a human? Okay? If I can, I'm not sick, but I'm not flourishing either physically. That's a whole different thing. That's kind of like the difference between the reactive versus the proactive. Okay, yes, you're not sick, you don't have to react, but proactively you could be in wonderful shape. You'd feel better, you'd sleep better, you'd do all these things better. Okay? So the vision can be a big part of this. What is a vision of where we want to go? A broader, more encompassing, more noble kind of thing, right? And I'll just tell you that the reason for change, why we need to change, is very motivating. Why do we need to change? Well, if we don't change, we'll get the hospital get 1% less funding, 10%. If we change, we can become a leader in neonatal health. People be driving to come to that's exciting. There's sort of a different level of excitement and enthusiasm. This is your opportunity to create enthusiasm. How inspirational is this direction that justifies why you need to make a change? And again, I'm not Pollyannish enough to know that every change fits that, but to the extent you can find it, it's helpful. Appropriateness. Okay, you've convinced me we need to change. Now what change? So, if I go home and my wife says, we've been talking about your weight, and I've scheduled you for a gastric bypass or whatever, it's like, whoa, maybe yes, I could lose some weight, but maybe there's another alternative solution before we go that route, okay? So just because you need a change, there's a lot of different ways to change. There's a lot of different ways that you might meet that need for change, and people may disagree about the right thing to do. Okay? Hey, our house is not big enough for our growing family. And the husband may say, well, let's move. And the wife, what's that, house hunter does that all the time, or whatever that flip or flop, I don't remember what the name of it is, but it's like, hey, do we stay here and add on, or do we move? Those are two different answers. And you might think one's the right and the other's not right. So appropriateness, just because you convince people you need to change, you also need to make sure that they feel like what you've got in mind for the solution is appropriate. Principal support. There's a whole host of research and experience that suggests that basically there's a lack of credibility among a lot of organizations about really, are you serious about this change, or are you just talking a good game? Okay? You hear maybe things, the program of the month, the flavor of the week, the whatever is like, if you're in a situation where there's a lack of credibility, like you're really serious about this, then the smartest move to make is to sit on the fence until there's enough evidence to see. Why would I be an early adopter of a change when I'm not sure, even if I thought it was a great idea, if I'm not sure you're willing to stick with it and make sure it happens? So this has to do with this sort of credibility among leaders. They want to know, are you serious about this? Efficacy, am I confident I can make the change? Can I do what's necessary? Can we do what's necessary? Can we succeed at this? Do we have the capability? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the resources? Can this work? A lot of times early EMR stuff, one of the major hurdles and sources of resistance to EMR were some physicians that didn't know how to use a computer. Like, I don't know if I can do this. Well, it's hard to get on board a change where you don't feel like you can succeed at it. All right? And finally, the fifth of these is valence, or value. What's in it for me? And you can think about value is, what do I get if I change? What's the pros of changing? But there's also some cons. Okay? What's the pros of not changing, and what are the cons? So, hey, we need to get a bigger house. Our family's growing. What's the pros of changing? We'll have more space. What's a con? Well, I'll have to leave the neighborhood that we like right now, and we'll go to a little bit of uncertain neighborhood. The con of changing is going to cost me some money. I have to spend some time packing. Okay? What are the pros of not changing? Well, I don't have to deal with all that stuff, and I have more time and everything else. What are the cons? Well, we're going to kill each other if we don't get out of this house. So people are weighing. It's not always a pro, just everything's on the pro thing. People are weighing these issues. And you're going to motivate people to the extent that they feel like the pros outweigh, the pros of changing and the cons of not changing outweigh the opposite. So what's in it for me? What's in it for us? And sometimes what's in it for you is you won't lose your job. Okay, I hate it. That's not the best place to be, but sometimes it's true. Or if we don't do this, we're not going to exist. Okay? Some of you may be trying to maintain a private practice. If we don't make some of these changes, we're going to have to be subsumed, or competition's going to beat us out, or we're not going to be able to get this contract, or whatever else. Sometimes that's just the reality. So the pros, yes, it's going to be difficult to change, but the cons of not changing are going to be really bad. Right? So thinking about but again, most people prefer it be put in a positive spin, but this is what's on people's mind. They want to know, what's in it for me? So, let's see, I think. So which of the following is not one of the 5 key questions? That's what I'm going to ask you is, it probably could be 6, but E is the right answer, right? Can I avoid the change? I had to make something up. So the change commitment equation, 5 things. Discrepancy, do we need to change? Appropriateness, is this the right change to meet that discrepancy? Are people serious about this? Can we and I successfully accomplish it? And what's in it for me is positive. I've got something to gain by this change. Now, what's the implication of the multiplications? It gets a lot bigger really quickly. That's right, a bazillion times 0 is 0, right? So think about it. Well, yeah, we need to change. I think this is pretty appropriate. I believe you guys are supporting it. I think there's something to be, but I don't think I can do it. Or I think, yeah, we need to change, and I think it's appropriate, and I feel like you're sticking behind it, and yeah, I'd probably do it, but I'm going to suffer as a result. Or, you know what? I really think this would be a fun change. I could benefit, but I don't see any need for us to be doing this. So the point is, you've got to worry about all 5 of these things because these sentiments are going through folks' minds. Now again, what's important to different people, and I should say this, what's valence? Valence is not just money. It's prestige, it's opportunity, it's being able to be listened to, it's opportunity, it's all of those other things that are built into that. So those are 5 questions, 5 sentiments that we're trying to create. I want to talk about 6 sort of levers that you can use to address those. Some of them are probably more important than others. You need to communicate openly, often and persuasively. Okay? So you need to, how persuasively can I communicate about this change? I will say that if you think you're doing enough, you need to do more. Okay? Remember, all change, there's uncertainty around it. What fills up uncertainty is information. You need to be able to share and talk about this with folks. I was doing a little bit of research on millennials, and this whole notion of communication is very important. Honest and open communication is very important. For example, feedback. Millennials like feedback. They don't want it just once every 6 months or once a year. They want to know feedback is important to them. They want to hear what you have to say. They're used to all of this structured communication and hearing from things. Okay? So feedback is important, but it's important to everybody. We want to know more about it. So tell me, spend time talking about it. I was working with a company and was doing a major culture change, and for 6 months, I basically wrote the president's newsletter comments, and every one of those was about the change. First one was like why we need to change. Second one was why this change is appropriate. Third one was why we're really going to be, we're really standing behind this, et cetera, et cetera. Keep reminding people, talk to them about these things. Empower others. This is really, really, really powerful. Okay? Empower and encourage their participation. Ask the question, how can I empower others to learn about or participate in making decisions about the change? This is really important to millennials. Okay? Again, it's important to most folks, but the notion of the more flat hierarchy, the team kind of decision making, this is really important. People want to hear, people want to be able to have a say and feel like they've had some input into the change. Think about it. I worked with one company. They were convinced, in this case, this was years ago, that this was a Whirlpool corporation and made washers and dryers and all that. Many years ago when I was working with them initially, you couldn't buy a washer from an international company. You couldn't buy a refrigerator. It was all homemade. Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Kenmore, General Electric, White Westinghouse. Those were your choices. Frigidaire. Okay? If you wanted to buy an appliance in America, that's what you bought. Well, they had a new CEO that realized that he had seen what happened. They were located up in Michigan, had happened to the auto industry. He said, that's not going to work anymore. So the year he tried to start getting them to be more global in their thinking was the same year they'd made the most money ever as a company. And he was now telling them, we're going to fundamentally change the way we do things around here. We're going to be more market-oriented. We're going to be more global. It's like, well, why do we need to do that? Again, a fundamental change. I should say, after it was all over, Wall Street Journal read an article and said Whirlpool had been the only company that had positioned themselves for the global appliance business, but even then they may have started 3 years too late. But I was there when they were starting it, at the get-go, and the top executives like, why the heck are we doing this? It's a fundamental change. It wasn't entirely clear. It was also a proactive change. But one of the things they did was they chose hourly production employees from their refrigeration, cooking, supply, washing, all of these units, and they sent them to Korea and Japan. Hey, we're going to go tour some plants over there. And those folks came back and said, you know what? We got to change. That was so much more powerful. They empowered those folks to go diagnose the need for change. I worked with a hospital, and they had some problems. We did, General Electric used to do a thing called workouts, and we worked with the local hospital. It's like, hey, you know what? We got all these problems. And so what we did was we set up teams of staff and nurses and doctors, if appropriate, who touched the problems. And we spent 2 days on every problem, analyzing, is it really a problem? And then coming up with solutions. And those people were bought in. If you empower people, so you can empower people to help diagnose, do we need to change? You can empower people, hey, we need to change. Can you help us figure out what we ought to do? That's appropriateness. You can empower people. Why would, if you involve people, would they ever choose a change that they didn't think they had efficacy for or that was not in their best interest? Empowerment is really, really important. Sometimes the change comes to you and you can't empower folks at that early level. But you can go to them and say, hey guys, we need to implement this change. Here's what it's been explained to me. Can you help me figure out how we best ought to implement it? And get people on board. You can even empower folks at that level. So looking for ways to engage people is a great way to win them over to commitment. I can't, and this also, organizations that have this kind of empowerment as part of what they do builds a culture where change is easier. If people are already engaged and already involved, they're going to tell you when you need to change. And they're going to be helping you find the right solutions. And many of you have already seen this in your own practices. You empower nurses or staff, and suddenly things come to the front and things become much more clear, and they're much more bought in to the direction of change that might result. So this is one of your questions. Empowering employees to help diagnose and or make decisions about changes in their implementation is most likely to generate. The answer is fatigue. No, I did some research on change fatigue. That's another problem. But change compliance. Share information. A lot of times organizations are really, they really hold that information tight. Well, a lot of your reasons for change come from that information. So sometimes you might have to share some information. That information could be internal. Here's our numbers, here's our press gaining, here's our whatever. Okay, here's our, readmissions rates, here's whatever, here's our hand washing scores. Share that information to help make the point and help generate ideas. But you can also share external sources. Hey, look at this article in Wall Street Journal about what this healthcare company did. They were successful. We could do something like that and be successful. That builds efficacy. It builds appropriateness. Other people have tried it. So beginning to share things as you come across them to help make the points is an important thing to do as well. So look for what internal and external information can you share. Now sometimes the change, you've been told to change. You can ask for information. Hey, you got something that shows why this works, right? When you're trying to decide on a drug to use one drug over the other, you want information, right? Which one's likely, what's the efficacy of each one of them? What are the side effects? How can I make a good decision? You need information. Same when people want to change or are thinking about changing. Align your structures and procedures. Are any structures and procedures barriers to the change? Okay? Think about, most of you have done EMRs already. Think about all the hassle and the barriers to implementing an EMR that was just built into the way you did things that really weren't necessarily about medical records, but it touched all this other stuff, and it's just like it just didn't match. You know, it was like, identify, if you're serious about a change being successful, you have to realize that there are ancillary things that touch that change that may be barriers or maybe ways that people can hide out and use excuses as not to get involved. You need to address those things or you're going to lose credibility. So, and people, if there are a lot of these things, they won't have efficacy. This is not going to work. And sometimes the barriers to change are people. Their fear of losing clout or importance, their fear of being made a martyr, their inability to do stuff, or what. There's a lot of things. These barriers and structures aren't just things you can draw on a chart. Another barrier sometimes is the fact that you've spent a lot of money on something else. You know, that whole one barrier is that if we do this, we're going to have to jettison something, our investment in this other thing. So then you have to deal with sunk cost and what are you doing there. Align your HR practices with the change. Are your HR practices, selection, appraisal, training, and compensation consistent with the change? If you're serious about it, you need to encourage, you need to find the right people, you need to hire for these kind of skills, whatever. You need to train people. A big part of efficacy is providing training so people feel comfortable with the change. And finally, is this notion is there a way to symbolically and memorably reinforce the change? Can you have a party? You know, how can you reinforce? And it's important to also celebrate small wins when you've made success. Change is like, particularly fundamental change, well actually probably all change, is like changing a habit, right? Habits are hard to change. Even the best intentioned folks have struggles with habit changing because there's always things there to remind you. That's the barriers and stuff about the way, you know, if you're trying to stop drinking, you got to get the liquor out of your house, right? Or you got to stop hanging around the same friends because all of those things reinforce stuff. But you have to set up different kind of structures and reinforce different things to remind people and to keep them on the path of change. So if you said, hey, you know what? We're not going to keep these paper records anymore. And you put that in a trash can and set it on fire, people remember it, you know. And it's also harder to come back in 2 months and say, we're going back to this paper. Are you kidding me? Right? It's sort of a line in the sand. So these ceremonies really symbolize stuff to people. Now they can be hokey or whatever, but they become sort of these touch marks that you really are serious and that we really are moving and that we really had some success we can celebrate and we really have this efficacy and this really is helping us solve the problems we were trying to deal with. You've got to remind people of that. Otherwise, the change just kind of drifts away, and that's what happens so many times, and that's why we lose this credibility. So looking for ways to do it. Now, you got to do what fits best in your organization, but these things really, they make a huge difference. They imprint on people's memories, and it helps them keep in mind what it is they're trying to do. Because sometimes you just don't throw a switch and big change happens. It takes effort over time to keep it going and to really have it become the way we do things now. I will say, we've talked about credibility. I want to leave you with this closing thought, that as your change leader, everything you say or don't say and everything you do or don't do sends a message to others about what you value and believe. And if you're an important person in the organization or to these people, they want to know. They want to know what you really believe. Do you really think this is a good idea? Do you really have confidence that they can succeed? Do you really think it's going to be in their best interest? So they're scrutinizing your behavior to try to figure out what you really think and what you really believe. And in a big change, they're really scrutinizing it. Okay? How serious are you? Is this really for all of us kind of thing? What does it mean? So just keep that in mind, because credibility is a big part of this. So hopefully through some of this, maybe we can improve the odds of your change efforts beating the 1 out of 3 kind of things. But hopefully this is giving you some ways to think about change a little bit differently and a little more deeply in terms of other people and their reactions. But I'll entertain any questions or comments. Anybody? I know you're so full of great ideas now you got to go out and do it. Oh, no, I think the whole notion of being open to feedback is very important, because it implies that I think your opinion's important, that I value your decision to commit, and that I'm open to the fact that I may be wrong. So I think getting feedback is really, really important. It's part of that. It's another form of empowerment. It's another form of, let me listen to you. Now, again, a lot of organizations have sham feedback. Well, hey, fill out this form, and then we'll throw it in the, we pretended. So, it needs to be sincere, but I think it's really important to say, hey, how's it working for you? I think it also shows empathy and compassion and interest and concern about other folks. How's it working? Do you have any ideas of how we might make it better? Any problems that we haven't seen? That opens that whole commitment, and this notion that we can collaborate is really, really powerful. So that's a good question. I absolutely think more of it is needed. But the other, yeah, it helps that credibility. The other thing is, now you might say, well, I'm just overrun with people that are naysayers. And that opens up the whole thing of how you might deal with them. It helps you understand where some resistance might be happening. It may be a one-off conversation that you need to have. It's like, help me understand why you're having more problem with this. I want to understand and be empathic to that, but we need to move on, and we need to do those other things. So you have to be careful not to end up being paralyzed. I have been involved in major efforts. One company that we did a whole bunch of stuff. It was very empowering. We collected data and then had retreats, and the employees analyzed it and everything. And there was an executive team of about 12, and we were off at this retreat with all the employees and doing this other stuff, and it was really, really powerful. And the president called me into his hotel room and said, what do you think about so-and-so? And we'd been working on this thing for about a year, and it's like, this other VP, he didn't make it through the workshop. And just sometimes some people are not on the right bus at the right time kind of thing. So that's another thing that you have to think about. And sometimes, again, after you've listened and whatever, it may be that there's the wrong person that can't help support the change, and they may have to be moved or found to go somewhere else. I will also say, in my stuff on millennials, you guys did ask about that. One of the things is we have the sense that millennials move jobs a lot. I did read something that actually in their 20s, baby boomers moved about as much. But the other thing is millennials oftentimes, more so than baby boomers in particular, move for the why. They want to go somewhere where the why fits fits what they're doing. And particularly in today's job market with a lot of opportunities, and millennials aren't as afraid of change anyways. Like, hey, I'll go try living there. I've never done that before. That might be fun. So I think there's a whole issue with purpose, looking for purpose. Why are you changing? Why is this important? Why will this change? How does it fit into our overall aspirations for this organization and the aspirations for our medical delivery or whatever? All of that stuff is really important to try to connect to the extent that you can, not just for millennials, but for everybody else. Again, everybody else goes home at the end of the day and they want to feel like they've been a part of something noble and wonderful. So, any other questions?
Yes, I've got a question for you.
All right.
First part, when you say millennials, where are you starting and stopping that group?
1982 to 2000 is what I read.
Okay. Second part, have you subdivided answers received from that group in your research? Because I'm thinking, being born at the beginning of that group, I remember when computer monitors, so I do remember Apple IIe as being there all the time. But I remember when computer monitors got multiple colors. I remember when printers got rid of their ribbons. I remember when the internet happened.
Yeah.
If you talk to somebody who said 2002 is the top of that,
Yeah.
they don't remember when there weren't smartphones. So when
I know.
you get your answers in those groups, have you ever subdivided those?
I have not, but that would be interesting because it is a big realm there. Yeah.
Man, those are total different worlds to grow up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a baby boomer and I didn't get to go to Woodstock, so it's like, yeah, Randy.
Well, I think the emphasis on communication. I mean, to your point, millennials been basically immersed in feedback and education or communication constantly. And what you're talking about with change management and implementation is communications, listening and feedback constantly. So there's a lot of communication I think that needs to take place to really earn the credibility and get the buy-in that you're talking about, the commitment.
Yeah, and I think every generation. I'm not an expert in generational stuff. I have two millennial sons, so but maybe I'm just I think a lot of the things that are important to millennials are important also to a lot of other people. They just may be more free to act on it than maybe some of us was. This search.
Less fear.
Huh?
Less fear.
Less fear. Well, they've had a lot of chaos in their lives. I mean, there was a lot of things happen that were just very different. They've gone through a lot of changes, huh?
In that group you gave us, some of those millennials were born after 9/11.
I know. Yeah.
Others were 18 when it happened.
Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, a little bit of market research right here. If you will, raise your hand if the word millennial has a connotation to you, either positive or negative.
Yeah.
Keep it up if the connotation has its positive. Just okay.
Thank
So
you.
see, and that to me is kind of a different thing too with it. It probably makes it a difficult group to study.
Yeah. Well, and I would agree with that. Yeah. Go ahead.
I had the opportunity not long ago to be in a meeting with one of our major healthcare organizations here in town, and one of the things that I see might need some study. There's this new position, what's not real new, physician advisor, and I think a lot of you as physicians have probably run into this now. And they refer to PAs, but it's not PAs like physician assistant, it's physician advisor. And it occurred to me during that meeting that it's exactly what you're talking about, but it ties all these things together. Because one of the questions that was asked to me is, if you have to go and face a group of physicians to get them, and it all has to do with coding and changing coding and writing things in the EHRs correctly and all that. But how do you get them to change? How do you get them to go along? And there's a couple of issues that change that. One of them is that there's a group of employed physicians. They're a little easier to change because they're under contract.
Right.
Then you have a whole bunch of independent physicians. They're a lot harder to change because they don't have to. and that they're tied to the facility and the good and the long-term value and sustainability of the facility is not tied to them directly like the ones that are employed. But it all has to do with EHRs, convincing people to change, physicians to physicians, physicians to administration. And it occurred to me as you're talking that this whole talk could be really great in that setting. And I know a lot of our physicians have had to either talk to physician advisors. A lot of you may be physician advisors, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing.
It is. But it's a new thing that it used to be outsourced. Now they're being brought into facilities.
Right.
And it all has to do with getting physicians to change for the benefit of the facility, basically.
Well, again, the question is why, right?
Yeah.
Why and what's in it for me?
Right.
And you know, again, sometimes what is in it for me is that I may have to take a hit on something material, but if you could convince me that the immaterial or the contribution that I'm making to welfare or, you know, the health of people is important or whatever, you need to try to connect me to that, you know, and be, you know, again, folks don't resist change just to be a pain in the butt. They resist change because there's some underlying thing, some fear, some uncertainty, some threat, some whatever, or they're just not, you know, they're not convinced that your answer is the right answer or your problem even exists or is the right problem. So I think being more empathic and beginning to try to tease that out will get you closer to finding what it is that sort of turns the switch for certain people. I think this other thing about millennials is very interesting. The older generation always is like bemoaning the younger generations, like either so they're not committed enough. They won't stay in a job long enough. I mean, my wife and I have been talking to my youngest son. He's been out of school. He's about to turn 26 tomorrow, and he's already had 3 or 4 jobs. It's like, well, you ought to stay in a job 2 years. Actually, that's not true anymore. You know, this notion of you need 2 years on your resume. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But hey, if they're more about the fit, they're more about the connection. And that freedom is something that baby boomers don't have because we got mortgages and we got kids in college and we got all these other things. So some of it, I think, is just that we're in just different states of our lives. And our parents, if you're a baby boomer, felt the same way about us probably. So I think that's part of but the millennials are becoming in charge. I mean, we can talk about it all we want to. I actually read one thing in preparation for this where they're suggesting that millennials, that baby boomers and Gen X's have a reverse mentorship with a millennial. So get with one it's kind of like letting them show you how to program your TV. That's what I do with my kids. So.
And it's interesting because you said they have the freedom, but I don't think they do to any higher degree than you would have at the same point in your life.
That's exactly
right.
right.
Being in that group, I've got a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
So I've got a mortgage, I've got my student debt, I've got my practice. Right. So I kind of have to argue that for your son, it has more to do with being 26 and probably single than it has to do with being a millennial.
And they're in a wonderful job market that not every millennial got to enter, right? Some millennials entered a terrible job market. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm an internist, a solo practitioner. I know we're a rare breed. I've had several millennials that have worked for me. In the past, when I give them a bonus or took them on a cruise as an office, they left. But what I found that was empowering to them is I give them purpose, like walk to end Alzheimer's. As an office, we did this. They showed up. They didn't want to get paid for it, but we put them on Facebook. You know, walk with the dog. But I found out they want to have a purpose, not money or like a reward for that. It took me a while to figure that out. My question to you, though, is being a smaller office, we're a lot cross-trained. So what I try to do is empower them. And in the military, I learned that you have to give them the tools. But when you empower them and give them the tools and they're not quite doing what you want, how do you disempower them?
Well, I think in that's a good question because it's hard. I think if you have the kind of culture that sounds like you have that's open and empowering, I think it's also the kind of culture where honest communication is important. And so being able to say, hey, I appreciate your effort, but I've got an issue to talk about. So this whole crucial conversation, there's a book, Crucial Conversations, another one, 5 Dysfunctions of a Teen. Trust is the underlying aspect to be able to then say, I trust you, so I can have some conflict. I can disagree. I'm concerned with the way you're going this way. So having that conversation, like, let's talk about this. I'm not as happy with the results. Let me explain why, and let's talk about what we can do about it. Or you could also decide to say that I'm setting parameters on my empowerment. So in other words, here's the lane. You've got free reign within this lane. If they're getting way outside of your lane, you may have to reestablish that. But they need to know why, because it's going to be a change. Why is this something that bothers you? What is it about what they're doing? Is it a concern for safety? Is it a concern for efficacy? Is it a concern for the image or the culture or whatever? You have to ask yourself that. But I think an open dialogue with them, for most folks, that would work, particularly in a very positively sounding culture like you're talking about. I think that's good. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Oh.
All right. All right. I'm a member of that baby boomer, really old fart.
Rock
people.
and roll, yeah.
And we grew up with parents and grandparents who went through the Great Depression and
Right.
World War II. And I think a lot of us, when we became parents, said, I'm not going to raise my kids the way I was raised. We're going to be different in how we do it. And maybe that's part of the problem with the way the millennials' attitudes are now.
Part of the problem, or you could say it's part of the benefit of the way they are now. I mean, it's a toss-up kind of thing. I mean, we probably over-parented in many cases, didn't put too many pads on them and all that other stuff. I don't know. It is an interesting, but clearly we are made not only genetically but our experiences. My parents were just like yours. They were all the Depression family. So I save every nut and screw that I can ever find, and I got it somewhere stuck. I'll never find it. But,
True.
but yeah, we do shape. We have shaped them in certain ways, and they in turn will shape their children in ways as well. I think it's just trying to have, again, I think it's important not to get too stereotypical and just, oh, they're that way, but realize that we're in different phases of life, and that what our value, or what valence and what is important to me may be different at different times, or I feel it in a little different way. Maybe some of our values are a little bit different. But again, I think if you can build an organization where people can have open dialogue and respect each other, then you've already gone a long way to fulfilling everybody's wants and needs. And you just got to be open to the fact that you may not know everything. So if you can engage other people to hear their perspective and be willing to be open about your own perspective, I think you can work through a lot of need for change and cross a lot of these generational boundaries a little bit better. So, that it? All right, thank you. Thanks very much, man. I appreciate it.
So, thank you, Dr. Harris. Are there any other SMA business matters that any members need to discuss? All right, there being no further business, I call this first general session of the Southern Medical Association closed. It's louder than the gavel. Next door. Excellent.